What's up, guys? I get super excited about conversations like today's because they are full of resilience, redemption, and purpose. My guest, Brezz, grew up surrounded by trauma and addiction, with the shadow of his father's struggles shaping much of his early life, and his own journey into substance use began at a young age, fueled by pain and a search for escape. Through unimaginable loss, including the deaths of both his father and younger brother to addiction, Brezz battled depression, suicidal thoughts, and a normalization of addiction that made it hard to see the truth. But a mental health crisis became the turning point, leading him into recovery, where he discovered a calling to help others. Brezz is now a certified peer and an inspiring counselor, and he uses his story and even his apparel brand to inspire, to reduce stigma, and to encourage others to lean on community and ask for help. This is a story of turning pain into purpose, so sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Brezz. This episode of The Recovery Couch is brought to you by Greg Swartz at RE/MAX Victory and Affiliates. Whether you're buying or selling your home, Greg brings heart, hustle, and honesty to every deal. Call Greg at 937-477-8975 today. Welcome back, my friends. Today on The Recovery Couch, I'm joined by Brezz, a certified peer and small business owner with over 4 years of sobriety. After 2 decades in warehouse work, Brezz made the bold move into the mental health and recovery field. Brezz was raised in trauma and addiction, and now uses his story and even his apparel brand to support others on their path to healing. I'd like to welcome to the show Brezz. Brezz, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Man, it's our pleasure. Thanks for being willing to come on the podcast and share your story. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and then how that played a role in some of your decision making?
Yeah, man. So I was initially raised in a 2-parent household. My mother had 3 children. I'm the middle child. So, right off the bat, my father struggled heavily with alcoholism and addiction in general. And, there was a lot of trauma involved in my upbringing. My father was physically and emotionally abusive. So, from the early stages of my life, I was very uncomfortable with myself, being raised in an environment where nothing you do is ever to the standard of your parents, and there being that physical and emotional abuse. I was not comfortable in my skin. So around 13 years old, I started drinking, smoking weed, and things like that. My mother and father had actually separated, right around that time. He moved out. Shortly thereafter, my father passes of a heroin overdose. And this was, early 90s. So, it wasn't, at least in my awareness, it wasn't a well-known thing, so it was very jarring, right? So
you're saying heroin at that point in time is talked about today. It's kind of little known, so it shocked you.
For sure. I mean, the opioid epidemic now touches everyone. I mean, I don't know anyone who hasn't been directly or indirectly affected by opioids in general. But in '94, it was a little different. So, once my father had passed, my father in general was the disciplinary. He was kind of the fear that kept us in line, My mother, of course, suffering with, they may have been separated, but they were together for many decades. So my mother kind of started going out, partying, leaving us at home. Um, and one thing led to another. Drinking became a more common thing for me. Um, Smoking weed became a daily thing for me. Um, so that would be like where I would identify the early stages of my addictions. But I was able to progress through life. Uh, I made it through high school. I ended up dropping out my senior year. At this point, I had still not done any other substances. I was just kind of smoking weed and drinking excessively. Um,
Let me ask you a question real quick, Breeze, if you don't mind. So, while we're on the subject of school, how was the home life, even prior to 13 when you started drinking and smoking weed? How was the home life affecting you at school, in elementary school, being in a physically and mentally abusive home? Was that affecting your schoolwork? Was that affecting your relationships with friends, with teachers?
Absolutely. So, just to be transparent, my childhood is very spotty, right? My memory, your brain has a way of blocking things that are extremely traumatic. So my memory is spotty, but from what I do recall, um, I was very socially withdrawn because I don't feel comfortable with myself. I don't feel confident in myself. Um, just the whole environment at home had taught me to think that I was not of equal value to others, and that really was reflected in how I carried myself. Um, I was sort of a loner. I didn't interact with a lot of people. Um, so early, you know, elementary school, middle school, I pretty much was an isolated individual. That slowly started to change as I got into high school, and you know, my father had passed, and I had kind of started to discover myself a little bit. I was able to interact with people and make friends and stuff like that, but that didn't really come until high school. Yeah.
So you're in high school. Your mother's going out after your father passed. I'm so sorry to hear about that. Um, what's that time in your life like emotionally? You know, your father loses his life to a battle, a silent battle. You know, where you knew about the alcohol use, but maybe there was a silent battle of opioids that's caught everybody off guard.
Why
And then
not?
your mother starts going out, and you're coping with marijuana and alcohol. But how are you when you're not high, when you're not drunk, when you're alone? Like, what are you going through emotionally, and how are you dealing with it?
I think my lack of skills and ways to deal with it really manifested in my drinking and smoking, which is why I did it so often. I didn't really have ways to cope. I have always been a huge fan of music, so there are points in time where I would kind of escape in music. But I dealt with a lot of depression, suicidal ideations, and I was not in a good headspace for a very long time in my life. I would say for a majority of my adult life, and that started at a very young age.
Are there any adults at this point that are taking notice to your change in behavior the way you're coping with alcohol and marijuana? Teachers, aunts, uncles, mother?
No. So that's why environmental things are so important, or not so important, so detrimental to your upbringing, right? Because I didn't know anything was. I thought this was normal. My family all operates to this day in this space. We have, drinking was a daily thing. Drinking still is a daily thing in my family. I remember going to birthday parties for children, 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 5-year-olds, and there's kegs at these parties. That's just what we did. So when you don't know anything else, it's just like the abuse. People have asked me, why didn't you ask for help when you're dealing with this physical abuse at home? Oh, you're not going through that? I thought this was normal. If you don't know anything else, that is your reality. So, school, people may have tried to talk to me, but because I'm not aware that there's any validity to what they're saying, it's not received well, and it doesn't go far. So, yeah.
Wow, Brezz, that is very transparent, very honest. So I'm sorry for getting us sidetracked.
Okay.
Taking us back to school, you hadn't really tried any other substances. So you're getting to the end of your high school career, 17, into junior year. You drop out your senior year, you said?
Yes. Yeah.
And you hadn't tried any other substances. So let's pick back up there.
Sure. I was drinking excessively in my senior year, to the point where I was not going to school so I could just hang out on the street and drink. So I drop out. 19, I had met my wife, and we moved into an apartment together. One of my family members had moved into this apartment with me and my wife, and who was my girlfriend, by the way, at that time. And we are partying every day. One evening comes where my family member, and another one of my family members are over at the apartment and are doing cocaine. I wanted to be a part of that, right? They were like locked in the bedroom. I knew what was going on. I wanted to be a part of it. I tried to be a part of that, but the family member who lived with me did not think it was a good idea. For whatever reason, we haven't really discussed that till this day. But long story short, I had talked my way in there, and I tried cocaine for the first time. My girlfriend at the time was not pleased with that. That caused a major issue. However, from that point forward, it became a thing where, we're going out on a Friday, Saturday night, going out drinking, we would get cocaine. So that
When you say we, you and your family member or your girlfriend at the time, your current wife?
No. So my wife has a lot of health issues, so she's never really been. She used to drink occasionally, but she never really, did any substances. So yeah, this was, when I say we, I just mean whoever, it became the social thing to do in my circles. my family members, my friends, when we would go to the bars or to the clubs or whatever, getting cocaine became a pretty common thing. And, there was like a connection. I can reflect back now and see like where the connection was formed, where like I would start drinking and I would want to get high. And that becomes pretty important to my recovery later. So, this goes on for several years. And then in 2003, 4-ish, ecstasy becomes like a big thing. When that came around, another family member, a different family member, was getting ecstasy and they were taking them. And I remember having a discussion with him about, I heard that there's opioids in these pills. You don't know what's in them. And I had always been very hesitant about opioids because of what happened to my father, right? Long story short, I was convinced that it was safe. I began taking ecstasy. That was a common thing where, that's one of them drugs where if you take it too often, it doesn't really affect you as much. So we would take it, wait a week, take it again. And while all this is going on, I'm still drinking, still smoking weed every day. It would take me a very long time to go on through like all of the years. But, I was never addicted to a particular substance. Like, I was addicted to plenty of substances. I never had a substance of choice, right? For me, it was always about accessibility. Anything that could remove me from myself. Anything that can make me feel good instantaneously. About escaping and about instant gratification. So many substances in my past, it kind of goes along as the years go along. Accessibility affects it. I've had my time with, we talked about ecstasy. I got into opioids eventually in my story, started with like smaller perks, and then it kind of went to perk 15s, perk 30s, and then of course that progresses to dope. And I had my time with PCP where we were smoking, what we referred to as dippers, which is PCP dip cigarettes.
What'd you call them? Dippers?
Dippers, yeah. So we would buy, this was like a cold cop situation, so it'll tell you how many years ago that was, but meaning we didn't call someone and set it up. We would just kind of walk out on the block, and there would be a guy there with a pack of Newport 100s and a jar, and you would just walk up to him randomly. You don't know the guy, and you ask him, and he'll dip the cigarettes and purchase them.
This episode of The Recovery Couch is brought to you by J.B. Davis at Performance Chrysler Jeep Dodge Ram. For integrity, service, and unbeatable deals, ask for J.B. in Centerville and tell them The Recovery Couch sent you.
A lot about substances. I would like to talk a little bit about some more trauma that happened in my life that kind of propelled me towards increased usage and to self-destruction, right? So in 2009, my mother's not feeling well. She goes to the hospital. She's having some issues. She finds out that she has cirrhosis. So we find out eventually she needs a liver transplant. My wife has had health issues since we met. My wife has actually, to date, has had 3 kidney transplants. She suffers from lupus. So my wife had suggested that my mother go to this hospital in Philadelphia where she had received 2 of her transplants. My mother gets enrolled in their program. She gets signed up for the liver transplant. She's blessed enough to have the liver transplant. However, that transplant took place in 2010. When she came home, you have to take like a rejection medicine for the rest of your life whenever you get any kind of transplant, because your body will recognize it's a foreign object and will reject it. So you have to take like a suppressant, anti-rejection medicine. At that time, there was only one anti-rejection medicine for liver transplants. When they gave it to my mother, my mother was actually allergic to that medication. So at that point, the doctors pretty much say there's nothing else we could do for you. They put her on hospice. And we just have to witness that, right? The progression of that. That was a very tough time in my life. My mother was really all we knew. With my father passing away at such a young age, my mother was very connected to us, to all 3 of us, me, my younger brother, and older brother. So it was a very tough situation. Watching your mother decline like that rather fastly, how I dealt with it was I care, so I'm going to be there just to see my mother and spend time with my mother every day. However, I cannot do that without being under the influence. Because for decades I had conditioned myself, this is how I deal with emotion, this is how I deal with any situation, good, bad, indifferent. So I would make sure that I was drinking and high every day to go over and see my mother. My mother passes shortly thereafter in 2010. My younger brother has a tough time because my younger brother, his addiction kind of manifested a lot earlier than mine, meaning he didn't work, he never got a driver's license, he just kind of stayed with my mother. He never really left the nest. Me, I've been working since I was 16. I met my wife, we moved out, we got a place, started a family. So my younger brother was really struggling when my mother passed. We were all struggling, but he was kind of uprooted because he had always stayed with her. He hadn't really developed a life of his own. Both of our addictions kind of took off at that point. Fast forward to 2000, so around 2013, 3 years after my mother passes, my younger brother gets into recovery. This is the first time it is brought into my awareness that someone can remove themselves from a life of drugs and alcohol. That kind of sounds silly if you haven't been on this side of the street, but I didn't know anyone who had gotten clean. I still know, outside of the community that I involve myself in, if I'm talking friends and family, no one stops drinking. No one has any inkling that there's even a reason to stop drinking, no matter how many problems there are as a direct result of that. So my brother ends up getting like 4 years under his belt, right? I was very proud of my brother, but I was still convinced that I didn't need there's no reason. I think a lot of people fall victim to this mindset, so I think it's worth mentioning. I was, again, working. I worked in a warehouse for 20 years. I was actually in recovery before I left that warehouse. We'll get to that, but that warehouse job, I started in '02, right? October of '02. So, I raised my daughter. We always had a roof over our head. We always had a vehicle. We always had food in the fridge. So it's easy to justify, right? It's like, well, I'm not an addict. I'm not an alcoholic because I don't live under a bridge. I don't drink wine from a paper bag. All these ways that you could justify, right? So, in 2017, 4 years into my brother's recovery, there was an incident where he silently relapsed, right? No one knew that he had relapsed. He ended up kind of going off the map, right? Where his girlfriend was texting me, I'm trying to get a hold of your brother, he's not answering. There was some stuff going on where he was, there was like another girl and all this stuff, right? So me and my older brother are texting his girlfriend back. Oh yeah, we're talking to him, he's good, he's just busy, he'll get back to you. Me and my brother were close, but there are times where he would just kind of not respond to me. So this goes on for a day, 2 days, 3 days. I start to get a little concerned. He's not responding to me or my older brother. So I call my older brother and I'm like, we should go over to the house and see what's going on. We at this point, we start to worry about his sobriety, right? Ironically, I was at the bar at noon that day when I decided to call my brother and say we should go check on my younger brother. We pull up to the house that he's living in. His car's in the driveway. We go banging on the door. He's not answering. Eventually, my older brother climbs through a dining room window, and my younger brother is in there. He had passed away. He had relapsed, and a combination of substances that had caused him to pass. When that happened, that was the moment, right, where, excuse me, that was the moment where I want to die at this point, right? But I can't do anything myself. I wasn't going to do anything extreme. That's arguable because I did do things extreme, but you know what I'm saying. I wouldn't take action to take my life. However, the substance use kind of took over my life at that point. I had went from using, around that time in my life, I was doing cocaine and, Percocet 30s and stuff like that, like every day, alternating between the stimulants and the opioids.
Those are expensive drugs, Brezz.
Yeah.
Were you still working? Were you still able to afford them? Or
Yeah, so the warehouse job was a very good job. I was paid well. I was able to manage. We would have been in a much better situation in life had I have not been dedicating so much of my income towards these things.
were you doing anything to supplement your income? Selling drugs, hitting licks?
Yeah, so that has always been, I've always been entrepreneurial, right? But when you're in the street, that is kind of manifested in different ways. So I would gather people who are looking, friends who are looking for something, and you kind of like gatekeep the people who have whatever everyone's looking for. Protect that connect, and then you kind of gather up everybody like, okay, well, what do you need, and then I would be able to go get something, kind of immediately distribute it, so I'm not sitting on it. And then you would think that I would say, well, now mine's free, but the addict mindset is, not only am I getting what I buy, but I'm getting more on top of that, so excess. And there's many things like that. I was not an ethical person, right? It was just kind of survival mode, whatever you can do. So there was a point where cocaine had became like super expensive and disappointing. It was not the cocaine that I had known in early 2000s. So I had one of the key moments that led me to recovery was I had changed from cocaine to methamphetamines. The methamphetamines I could buy a quarter gram, and that quarter gram would last me days, right? And it would be $20-$30. So when I made that switch, it became mandatory, right? Before, I was using these substances to escape instant gratification. With the methamphetamines, however, it was, if you don't do this, you're not getting out of bed. You're definitely not going to work. So, I had struggled with mental health. Addiction and mental health go hand in hand, in my experience. But I had struggled with my mental health, and I had a psychiatrist, and I was on medication, and I had a note. Are you aware of what FMLA is?
Family medical leave of absence.
Yes. So, due to my mental health, I had FMLA at my job at the warehouse. From 2019 to 2021, when I got into recovery, I had all but quit my job, right? I still worked there. I was still on the schedule. But because I had FMLA, I could not be held accountable for my absenteeism. So I was calling out 3-4 times a week. And I was spending the majority of that time in my bed, just wanting to die, man. I was in such a dark place. And at this time, even when I had the substances, right? Even when I was drinking, I was using the methamphetamines, the depression was so bad that I couldn't get out of bed.
Even when you were drunk or high?
Yes, it did not, it had gotten to a point where nothing was helping me escape that emotion, that space. I remember my bathroom was directly across the hall from my bedroom. I mean, we're talking 10 steps. And I would not have it in me to get up and go to the bathroom. I couldn't. It's hard for me even to understand of how I could have been in that place. But I would just hold it until I had no choice. But just going to the bathroom seemed impossible. My wife would have to bring me in food and basically make me eat because I just did not want to be alive. And from 2019 to 2021, I was going in and out of like short stay mental health facilities. So I would, go to like, I would go in, I would say I'm struggling with my mental health. I'm having all these feelings and emotions, but I would never say, I drink heavily, I use all these substances. So of course they can only help you so much, right? So in 2021, I go into another short-term mental health hospital, and same story. I go in there, it's just my mental health. There's one nurse who has a conversation with me, or tech, whatever her title was. She has this conversation with me, and a light bulb goes off, man. And you hear this a lot in the recovery community. I don't know what it is. Like, I honestly don't think that she said anything particular that made that light bulb go off. I just think that I was gifted that desperation of like, something needs to change. So, she suggests that I go into a 30-day rehab facility. I struggle with that because, you can justify anything you want, right? My wife has all these health issues. Like, what happens if something happens, my wife, and I'm in here, whatever. But I end up talking to my wife, and my wife, of course, is like, this is a great idea. I'll be fine. Go in. So I end up committing to that. They do what they call a bed-to-bed. So I was, the inpatient facility picked me up from the mental health hospital to take me to their facility. I had good health insurance through the warehouse. So the rehab facility that I was going into was actually in up near Syracuse, New York, in Mount Holly, Pennsylvania, I think it was, or something. So it was like 5 hours north of where I lived. They sent the driver all the way down to pick me up. I get in the vehicle, and when I get in the vehicle, the guy says, "We have to take you to Baltimore," which is like another hour and a half south, to pick up another guy who's also going in. When we get to Baltimore VA hospital, this guy comes. His name was Tim. He gets in the car with me. Now we have about a 6-hour ride to this inpatient facility. That ride was so crucial to me building that base of recovery. Tim was an older guy who had been in and out of recovery for many years. He actually had cirrhosis, and this was like why he was getting back into recovery. He had end stages cirrhosis. He ended up passing shortly after we completed the facility. But on that ride, he kind of educated me on 12 steps. He educated me on what it was all about, the common misconceptions. He kind of put to rest a lot of my fears about, I had a lot of fears about God, and I had a lot of resentment there, One of my number one resentments in life is God. Was God. When you experience a life full of trauma, and you're living in a negative headspace, it was easy for me to say, there is no God. If there is a God, he's not a fan of me, and I'm not a fan of him. So we get into this 30-day program. They have a policy, which, I look back on all this stuff. This is God at work, right? This is crucial moments happening back to back to back that get me to where I am today. I'm not real good with recognizing God shots. In hindsight, they're very clear, So they have this policy in the facility. You only get to call your family one 15-minute phone call once a week on Saturday. I was very codependent on my wife. I went from my mother to my wife, never lived on my own. Actually learned how to do laundry at 40 years old in that rehab facility. I just don't know how to survive without my wife. So the policy was you only get that phone call if every day of the week you make morning meditation and you make the 12-step group at 7 o'clock that evening. So every day of the week there was a 12-step group and morning meditation. So I was kind of forced to go to these meetings. Today I can say those things, that conversation with Tim, that nurse at the facility that talked me into going into the program, the 12 steps, the sponsor that I got 11 days out of rehab, all of these things are God at work. Getting me to a place where, I eventually decided one of the founding, one of the key principles of the 12 steps is paying it forward, right? I can only keep what I have by giving it away. So, while I do service work and all of this, I could not stand the warehouse work, right? I now have purpose in life. Never had purpose, never had determination, never had goals. So I chose to go into the mental health and substance abuse field. I became a certified peer in 2023. Right now I work at a clinic, but mid-July I will be changing companies, and I will be going to work in the prison system. And I am now working on getting my CADC, which is Certified Drug and Alcohol Counselor. So that's a major step, because it goes from the peer role to an actual counselor role. I just want to be as impactful as I can, man, in other people's lives. I started what started out as like a t-shirt line. Fourth Dimension Apparel, the name is pulled directly from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. One of the co-founders said he was rocketed into the fourth dimension of existence, and he was referring to spirituality and connection. The clothing line is just another way. Our tagline is spark conversations that ignite change. It's just another way for me to get people talking, to bring the possibility of recovery into everyone's awareness, and to lower stigma from those who don't understand what people are going through and pass judgment and have that stigma, who there in turn keeps that shame, guilt, in the addict, where they're shameful, they feel guilty, and they don't want to speak out. They don't want to ask for help. They don't want to admit they have a problem. Stigma plays a huge part in all of that.
So well said, Brezz. You speak your story so eloquently, brother. I can tell that you've shared this with other people. Probably people, if I'm guessing, who are you peer mentor to. And that work that you've put in with them is exuding in confidence. It's shining through in this conversation right now. And so I want to commend you from the bottom of my heart, brother, for accepting that calling. It's awesome when you get to the point in your story where you say you found purpose. Your whole tone changes. You can tell that finding that purpose changed your entire life. And since then, you've become a certified peer in 2023 because you found your purpose and answered your calling. And you're currently working on your CADC, which will be a next huge step in the work that you're doing to help people who are broken, who are lonely, who are afraid, and have experienced a lot of trauma. So I just want to thank you so much, Brezz, for coming on the show and sharing your heart, brother. Let me ask you one last question before we wrap this thing up. What kind of advice, and I hate the word advice, but what kind of one lasting impression would you like to give to anybody out there listening who might still be in active addiction, or they're in the early stages of recovery, that don't think that they can overcome substance abuse? What would you like to end this conversation with, like as a just some motivation to that person?
So if we look in the right places, there are lots of pockets of communities of people who have discovered a solution, and those solutions vary. There's many ways to recover. My sponsor always says, we all have the same destination. We all take our own vehicle. So I stand here today as living proof that recovery is possible. And there's plenty of others who do that as well. A key thing for me was learning to take suggestions and learning to ask for help. For a very long time, I thought, I got this. I can do this. Anything I set my mind to, I can achieve. The truth is, when it came to drugs and alcohol, that was not one of them. I had to learn to ask for help. I had to learn to take suggestions from people who had achieved something that I wanted to achieve. So get connected, ask for help, take suggestions.
Great answer. Thank you so much, Brezz. For anybody listening, go ahead and share this episode with somebody that might needs to hear it. Comment if you want to hear more of Brezz's story or follow his journey into a CADC license. Comment, ask questions. We'll be glad to get back with you on those comments, and stay tuned for our next episode. And I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in. Remember, you always have a seat right here on the Recovery Couch. Thank you, Brezz.
Thanks so much, man.
This episode of the Recovery Couch is brought to you by True Story Media, where real stories find their voice. Whether it's podcasting, video production, or publishing powerful testimonies, True Story Media exists to help people share messages that matter. If you've got a story of transformation, faith, or recovery, True Story Media will help you tell it with excellence and impact. You can learn more about True Story Media at www.recoverycouch.com so you can start telling your true story today. Wow, what a powerful and inspiring testimony by Brezz. His authenticity and ability to be able to talk about all of the trauma that came from physical and emotional abuse in his childhood that led to addiction and eventually led to Brezz having a heart to help other people in their recovery. This is just an incredible and raw conversation with Brezz. His story is a powerful reminder that no matter how deep the pain runs, there's always a path toward healing and redemption, from losing loved ones to addiction to facing his own battles to now standing as a voice of hope. Brezz proves that recovery is possible and that our stories do matter. If Brezz's journey inspired you, share this episode with someone who needs encouragement today. And don't forget, join the Recovery Couch Inner Circle on Patreon. That's where you'll find bonus content, and stay tuned for the release of my book, Step 4, A Journey Through Addiction, which is coming soon. And while you're at it, go and hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe. We need to get these messages of hope into the hands of people that need them the most. And the more that we like and subscribe on this channel, the more that we can offer these redemptive messages to other people. We're so grateful to have you here on the Recovery Couch. I want to thank you for watching, and please never forget that you always have a seat right here on the Recovery Couch.